We're entering an era where the self-taught is more powerful than ever before. They fall under two extremes, the calculated self-taught and the unhinged self-taught. And I think to some degree, all of us are in some way self-taught. Even when we're brought into a team, there is a lot of work that the dev has to do to understand the code base, learn the new technology. Starting with the calculated self-taught, this is the type of person that when they go on Google, their first search term is, what is the best course for XYZ? And they'll spend hours just researching the best course. They'll read Reddit, they'll read other forums, X, whatever. Once they identify this person they believe is the best source, they will stick to this person throughout. Oftentimes they're focused on, okay, how many years of experience do they have? What field did they work in? If you're a self-taught developer and your goal is to do well on LeetCode, odds are you're going to go to people that are really good at LeetCode. But let's say you're somebody who just wants to go into a team. One example I can think of is somebody who maybe they graduated as an electrical engineer and they're applying for jobs in coding. So there is a deviation from what they're used to. For them, they benefit maybe from finding somebody who worked in the industry. So this is an example of somebody who is a calculated self-taught. They know the industry has standards, and instead of trying to consume everything that they can find, they choose a few trusted sources and stick to them closely. From this comes a pretty big advantage if it's the right choice, and that is in consistency. If this one person is your go-to, if you spend hundreds of hours or a long period of time learning from this person, there's a lot of things that you are going to pick up. Coding habits. You're going to pick up even a lot of their system choices. And these will seep into your own choices. In a way, they are melding your brain. And this has the benefit of, hey, if you pick the right person here and you stay consistent with it, you end up in a position where you can really be thrown straight into a job and have a higher chance of doing well. Instead of hopping all over the place, right, going from resource to resource, right, you start from lecture 1 all the way to lecture 100. And as a part of this, you develop a more consistent approach on the craft. If you spend enough time learning from a short list of people, you slowly pick up their habits and you learn a common language of the industry without necessarily needing someone to formally teach it to you. And obviously this would depend on who you picked. Personally, I always encourage people to really look at the source that they're learning from and ask yourself, did they actually work in tech? This may not matter to you, right? If you're not interested in finding a job, I don't think this should matter to you at all, right? I wouldn't go to a web dev to learn about kernel. The benefit of being in this position of a calculated self-taught is that you have a high potential of being drop-in ready. We can throw you into a job, and odds are, because you spent so much time learning from somebody who was on the job, everything that you do and the decisions you make should reflect a massive advantage of a self-taught. Superpower that comes from somebody who is self-taught is self-driven. This is an underestimated advantage because a lot of people, the drive that they get is from a third-party source. Really, if you fall into this camp of being self-driven, I would say you are part of the 1% because most people are not in this camp. When I'm talking about third party, I'm saying things like family, friends, colleagues even. They rely on these things to keep them going. What happens is, today their family doesn't see eye to eye with what they're doing, or their friends or their colleagues, their output goes down. And I found people that are in this camp to be very inconsistent, right? They may have days where they're working well. There's a good chance they're gonna have off days just because of this. And also I find they tend to not thrive as well in obscurity. When I give you work that doesn't have somebody that can, be at your neck and help you out, you're at a huge disadvantage. Whereas the self-taught, they are completely self-reliant. For calculated self-taught specifically, right, remember there are two extremes here, the calculated and the unhinged, and we'll get into the unhinged. The disadvantage of a calculated self-taught is that they sacrifice the other great advantage, which is uniqueness. The biggest advantage is self-reliance. The next benefit is creativity. Your ability to be unique is a significant difference over somebody who is not self-taught. And there are pros and there are cons to this. Unique does not necessarily mean better. There are cases where being unique is actually a negative, and we'll get into that later. But you have to realize that if you are in this camp of being completely calculated, you're going to go with a lot of what people tell you to do. We've all heard people say, oh, it's just the way we've always done it. I hear this more often than I'd like to admit. There are people in this world that are okay with this. They hear this and they're okay, that's fine. And there are cases where it makes sense. There are absolutely industry standards. But I can tell you right now, if you just accept this blindly and you don't actually attack it, there is a lot of things that are being left on the table there. And that's where the opposing type comes in, which is the unhinged self-taught. The unhinged self-taught has very little attachment to how something is supposed to be done. They consume almost anything in their path, and they really have no attachment to one person. They are accepting of learning from multiple sources. And oftentimes they won't look into things like, okay, how many years of experience do they have? What field did they work in? They aren't calculating each and every step that they make on the path of finding their resources. They just want to learn. For lack of a better saying, in it for the love of the game. They just want exposure. They want to be exposed to as many viewpoints, perspectives as possible. So with the unhinged self-taught, there really is no real curriculum. They'll take a little from here, take a little from there, and really they have credence over what they keep and what they don't. So they might take some habits from this person, they might take some habits from this person, and it culminates into really an unhinged ball of habits. When you learn almost entirely from one school of thought, you also inherit its limit. You learn which ideas are considered good, but you also learn which ideas are considered stupid before you ever even test them. Because that's the thing, when you are in this unhinged position of learning from many sources, there is a gap here. You're jumping around. You might go from a YouTube video to a forum to a freaking x.com post. You are going all over the internet and filling in the gaps as you see fit. It's very unlikely that you're going to conform to one way of thinking. So the unhinged self-taught is less protected from the bad ideas, but they're also less protected from the odd good ideas. There are cases of good industry standards. Engineers over the last 50 years or however long we've been coding for, it would be idiotic to say that the things that they've done are for no reason. It's important to learn from the mistakes of the engineers before you, but it's a danger to let this become a limiting factor for your own ideas. Oftentimes these odd good ideas are what creates a better solution. You know, a lot of people will attribute a bad idea to really just being, it's not normal. If you go to somebody who says, hey, it's always been done this way, really they did not even listen to your option. Their brain is already occupied with a certain solution that they've probably done for years and years and years, and it's so embedded in their brain that they won't even consider the alternative option. So the benefit of being unhinged here is that you are ignoring of that. You will go down the path of the odd good idea, and it may turn into a better solution. When someone tells them that's not how this is normally done, they're much more likely to ask a different question. Okay, but does it work? And this is actually a pretty important skill to have in the field. When your boss is knocking at your door saying, hey, we got to get this out the door in 2 weeks, your ability to go against industry standard here can really be a massive advantage. When you can weigh the options of what you normally do and say, hey, this thing here, maybe it's a good option, but it's double the effort for 10% improvement. You can look at these kinds of options that you're weighing in your project and say, hey, maybe we can deviate from this. Yes, maybe it's not the best idea right away, but it is the only option for us to get up to our deadline. And so it goes above and beyond just possibly finding a better solution. It's also being in the mindset always of asking why it's being done a certain way. If you're a very calculated person and you're presented with that case that we just mentioned, right, where it's a 2-week deadline, you're not going to be agile. You're not going to be ready to go, right? You're going to be thinking, oh, wait, we can't do it this way. I've always done it this way. The person who is unhinged, they're used to thinking in this mindset. And so as soon as this happens, they're ready to go and they're going to adapt in a much quicker pattern because your focus is on the output while the method is the afterthought. People will spend 10 times the effort and the time on something just to get an output that pretty much looks the same. And while there might be reasons for this, sometimes it's not worth it. And people won't realize that until they don't do it. If we stick to the way we've always done it and it takes 15 hours, we might not realize this 3x effort we put in only translates to a very minor improvement. Being willing to accept this new alternative could result in something that saved you enough time to work on other things. And so to conclude here, right, the unhinged has a higher chance of producing something genuinely unique because they are not trying to conform to standards or protect their reputation amongst people in their field. They are just interested in the game itself. And again, you know, as we've discussed, there are industry standards for a reason. It is not always good to go against industry standard, but I do believe it's always good to have a question about it. Don't just blindly go with what's normal in the industry just because people tell you to do it. The unhinged gets the benefit of not giving a damn. Right? That creative freedom that the unhinged gets can produce things nobody thought to try, at risk of repeating mistakes from those that came before them. The very calculated mindset you might learn from this one person, if you accept this blindly, the benefit you get is that you won't make the mistakes that they made. Odds are they're teaching you these things because they made mistakes in the past. When you're in the unhinged mindset and you're kind of just taking bits and bits from each piece, and especially in this in-between stage, you're likely to meld a lot of these ideas together. Best practices are useful until they become rules. There's a reason industries develop best practices. Usually, thousands of people have already made the same mistakes, and a best practice is the lesson left behind. The same reason you don't go touching hot stoves. If you just go in unhinged just for the sake of being different, and you don't ask why they do it and try to understand it first, you end up in a risk of wasting time. Simply put, at the same time, there is a cost to purely focusing on the rules. Especially as you get further along in your career and you've spent years and years working in a certain field, you stop seeing its standards as choices. So you ask, how is this normally built, before asking, how should I build this? And so in the camp of the unhinged self-taught, they may not even know about the limitation to begin with. Right? There might be something that everyone knows, but this person didn't get the memo. And so they go down their pathway trying to carve out a solution that somebody already had an answer to. And in some cases, they'll find out why. They'll find out why they had that limitation to begin with. On the other side of the coin, they may find out that there was no reason for it at all. It's like if somebody tells you there's a boogeyman down in the basement, but nobody thought to look. The day somebody opens that door and finds out there's no boogeyman, you just opened up an entire basement. Now everyone gets to go into the basement. They're not scared anymore. Fucking bug in here. Spider. I had to kill a spider. A surprising number of interesting ideas come from the people who were just ignorant enough to attempt them. Really, each of these mindsets have their own dangers. The dangers of the too calculated is that you conform to whatever it is that you're learning from. And oftentimes they are doing things only because it's always been done that way. And so you stifle a massive benefit that you get, which is, as we discussed, uniqueness, right? The ability to be creative and think of things on your own. Every time you learn something that should be done a certain way, you become a little less likely to explore the alternatives. This is useful when standards exist for a good reason, but harmful when the following the standards become automatic. There are a lot of people that are just going through life on autopilot. They show up to work, they code what they're going to code, they don't try to invent new things. They just go through life like they're on FSR all the time. And when you ask this person why, and they tell you it's always been that way, this is something you should never end up in a position of. You should always have an answer to why something's being done. And if you can explain it and justify it, then that's fine. But the day you realize that you're doing something only because it's always been done that way is the day that you should be asking why. Try to understand what it is that's causing you to do it that way. A danger of being too calculated is that you end up in that autopilot state. And the thing is this isn't just exclusive to something like programming, right? An artist often starts with loose sketches before worrying about perfect lines. A musician plays around on a piano before deciding what the song is supposed to become. A developer might build an ugly prototype simply to find out whether an idea is worth building at all. It's worth noting that AI really pegs us into a place of being too calculated. AI by nature really is industry standard. The data that it's trained on is typically the most common approaches. So unfortunately, AI can peg us into this too calculated approach where we're doing something just because it's always been done that way. And creation really requires a period where you're allowed to make something wrong. And if you become too focused on producing the correct thing from the very beginning, you can end up very good at producing work that looks exactly like everyone else's. If all you do is learn from this one person or confine yourself to a very specific source, you're going to turn in like Snape, right? You're going to come out with a black hair, black outfit. But there's also risks to being unhinged. And as we discussed before, there's a reason some things are industry standard. Oftentimes, unhinged people, they can mistake being different for being smart. It is never good to be different just for the sake of being different. They can spend 3 weeks creating their own solution to a problem that an existing tool would have solved in 10 minutes. Right, we're seeing this a lot today where people are building these full-scale AI vibe-coded apps where it's like, dude, we already had that. Why did we need that? Where you're just creating things just for the sake of it, thinking that, oh, my shit is better than your shit. There is a point where ignoring other people's knowledge stops being independence and starts becoming ego. You need to understand the rules well enough to know which ones are worth breaking. While creativity comes from freedom, having a good output from creativity really requires you to understand constraints. You can look at the best music composers. There's music composers out there that completely go against music theory. But the only reason they do that is because they understand it well enough to know what they can get away with. Understanding of constraints prevents you from going off the deep end and creating something that's absolute garbage. So you can have a balance of knowing the constraints and the limitations while still deviating enough to making it something unique. You need to understand the rules well enough to know which ones are worth breaking. Otherwise, you are not thinking outside the box. You simply don't know where the box is. Really, there is a necessity here as a self-taught to be in the middle ground and to not just be on one side of this coin. And it's worth noting where you fall is largely a personality-based thing. There are some people that are just naturally drawn to structure, and there are people that are naturally drawn to chaos. And it's important to realize that neither is automatically better. The important part here is the middle ground. Almost every good developer is self-taught in some way. The field changes too quickly for formal education to cover everything you will need throughout your career. If you've got a CS degree, I think you'll know you really don't learn jack when it comes to college. You use algorithms and data structures here and there, but for the most part, what you are doing on a day-to-day basis is something you had to teach outside of the structure. Eventually, a new language, tool, system, or problem appears, and nobody's gonna sit you in a classroom and teach it to you. And so at the end of the day, at some point, you're gonna have to teach yourself, and it's important to think about how you are doing that. Are you going completely unhinged, where you're just taking bits from every piece? Are you going completely calculated, where you're just picking one curated source? Ideally, you're going with a mixture of both. I think both have their advantages. You should be calculated enough to learn from the people who have already made mistakes and understand why they are doing it the way that they're doing it, but you should stay unhinged in a way that lets you read outside of your field. And most importantly, do not become emotionally attached to doing something the accepted way simply because you worked hard to learn it, right? This is a huge portion of this. You'll find this a lot where the people that you learn from, especially online, because they've done something a certain way for so long, it becomes harder and harder to change it. And so at the end of all this, the scariest self-taught is the one who is capable of lane switching, being both calculated in an effort to learn why we have industry standards, but being unhinged enough to accept that industry standards are not always sane. They are the first to question the way it's always been done, and they have enough independence to imagine doing it a different way. The combination of an unhinged self-taught with an understanding of best practices is difficult to compete with. The advantage belongs to the person who benefits from the pool of information while refusing to let what they learn become a wall around the way they think. Because with the tools afforded to us, they are going to be the most powerful people on the planet. This is the person you should fear. This is the person that's going to take your job. This is the person that's going to do better than you, do laps around you, and it won't even be difficult.